everyone! The first thing that we're going to do is we're going to tape our borders in our sketchbook. And what I actually did is I taped it on my clothes first to kind of take away some of that stickiness, and then I taped my borders down. From there, I'm just labeling some things to keep in mind as I paint. So for example, my color scheme for both of these is monochromatic. I'm going to use orange on the left and yellow on the right. I also just used my spray bottle to help get my paper a little bit wet, and now I'm going in with my lightest value of orange first. I used the wet on wet method to fade my orange down, and then I did the same thing for the yellow. I did realize though that I don't really need to fade all the way down, so I kind of just faded until it feathered out and it was a really soft light edge. So again, lighter values towards the top, and then as we're working our way down, the value is going to get darker. We're going to add more and more of the color into our painting. So for example, here you can see I made a jagged line to show my mountains, but my value is a little bit darker than my original lightest value. I did still really try to keep my values really light to practice with the amount that I'm adding in. So again, doing the same technique as I work my way down. The one big thing is that it's very important for you to wait until each layer is dry. If you do not wait, your layers will bleed together. At one point, I did not wait long enough, and you will see that in this video as well. Again, keep repeating this process, varying your line so it doesn't have to be the same exact type of jagged line. Make it a little different each time. By varying it up and making it different, it kind of shows more of that realistic quality while you're painting. So again, just keep adding more and more of your color as you work your way down in each layer. So you can see that each of my values are getting more saturated and more, for example now, more orange as I'm going down. You can see I'm getting close to my pure color. Here you can see I did not let my original yellow layer that I just did dry enough, so it kind of bled together, so I just faded it in upwards to my original layer, so I really need to let that dry. Again, I'm using more and more orange as I work my way down, so it's getting brighter in value and more saturated. And same with my yellow. Towards the very bottom, we're actually going to add in a little tiny bit of black. A little bit of black can go a long way. When you're mixing colors, darker colors overtake lighter ones. You always want to add in a little bit at a time, which is kind of what you're practicing here, adding in a little bit of color at a time to create darker values. Here you can see me adding my pure orange. So after this layer dries, you'll start to see me adding in my darker values of orange and yellow. Okay, so you see my pure values. And then so now I'm taking my orange, adding in a little black at a time to create a little bit of a darker orange, and then using that to fade down. I got my paint a little bit more wet with my spray bottle, and then going in with yellow and just a little bit of black so I can create a nice darker yellow. You can see it starts to green the yellow, whereas the orange kind of becomes a little brown the more black that we add into it. I also wanted to note that even though I'm painting like a line as I go down, I'm kind of smushing my brush as I paint, as I feather it down, so it blends together smoother. Also, because once I get closer to this layer with the black added into it, it does kind of create like an interesting texture because of how thick the paint is becoming since I'm using less water. So I do smush my brush to create a little bit of texture in my rock, and I try to add even more little crevices and details because we're getting closer to the viewer and we're now in that foreground, meaning we can see more of those details. Since it is atmospheric perspective, the closer you are, the more you can see the details, whereas the farther away you are, the less details you can see. Now you can see that I'm taking off all my tape. Again, please wait until this dries for you to do this. And then what we're going to do actually is we're going to take notes on this entire process so we can see what we did and what we need to improve for the next time. So we just explored learning about atmospheric perspective, first using the color scheme Monochromatic, and the very first one using specifically orange. Again, you can use any color of your choice. Remember that we keep lighter values towards the top, and then we use water to lighten those colors, and then we use less and less water, more color as we work our way down to mid values. And then you can see where I started adding like my pure orange, and then how I started adding in a little bit of black. I also like to date my pieces and sign it at the bottom. So on the right side, again, just taking more notes, I labeled my color scheme Monochromatic, and that I used yellow for this one. I also reminded myself towards the top, I used more water and less color. For this one, I actually wanted to write right on my painting to kind of explain what I did. So I created a jagged line, and then I faded that line down and feathered it out so it was a really soft edge. So I started with a hard edge and then faded it down so it was a soft edge. I repeated that process, but I added slightly more color. Repeat it again, and remember, we're varying the direction of our lines. And then again, I repeated multiple times until I got to my pure color. And then after my pure color, I again repeated, but I added in a little bit of black because the closer we get, the more detail, but then the farther away, the less detail. I also wanted to note back to how I smushed my brush. Some of them, depending on the color and just the texture of the paint, we can create actual different textures by how we smush our brush. So on the left side, my texture actually looks smoother, whereas on my right side, I had more of a rough texture. I also wanted to note that this process is sort of like creating a value scale, so taking our lightest value all the way to our darkest value of that color. We're gradually changing from light to dark. And lastly, I did just want to go back over and explain what atmospheric perspective is again. So it's blurry and less detail the farther away that you're looking, whereas there's more detail and the values are a lot darker the closer it is to the foreground, to the viewer. Hope you enjoyed this process, and we're going to be learning about how to do the same thing but with complementary colors next. And again, at the bottom, I also labeled where the foreground, middle ground, and background are. Hope you enjoyed this process.